Hello, welcome to From Soft Serve, where I'm working on a mod. It's called the Bloodborne Remaster project because obviously it's my project and it's not an official remaster, but if you saw the title of this video, I apologize, Sony. I'm sure you're going to remaster it at some point, but you haven't yet, and it's been a long time, and we're coming up on the 10th anniversary. And for the love of God, please do something with Bloodborne. But also don't hate me, and I love you, and you're great. But anyway, today we're in Bloodborne, and my mod is at version 0.75. I will be updating it again. Man, look at those shadows on the bullets that are on the chest piece here. You'll also notice the shallow depth of field. That's actually from Reshade. That is, you can turn that off, but this mod is not about Reshade, actually. This is about modifying the system files, and so I wanted to do a quick walk through Central Yarnum to show you what I've done. I'm going to have to kill this jabroni first, because I don't actually have... Oh my god, there we go. Yeah, emulation has gotten to a point that is so good that we have all of the visual feature set at this point. This video is also not about how the emulation is going, but as you can tell, it's fantastic. We have the fog, we have ambient occlusion, we have motion blur, which you can turn off. But I wanted to take a quick walk through, and this is on my actual character that I've played only on the emulator. And through all the different versions of the emulator, this character has continued, and I'm actually to the fishing hamlet in the DLC, so I've almost finished the entire game on this character. But I wanted to do a quick walk, and so first thing, of course, is I added dynamic shadows basically to the entire world. So you'll see the actual wheelchair gets a shadow, this gets a shadow. Ooh, he dropped a blood vial, you'll live to see it. So the baked lighting, which is the lighting that is just stored as an image, essentially, a texture, the baked lighting is still there. I have not removed the baked lighting. That was in an earlier version, but you'll see even the grass gets shadows. I had to modify the shadow settings to even really work with this, because their distance was set really only for like the player and then the enemies. It wasn't really meant to be used on buildings, and so I had to change the depth setting, and then how far in the distance it could render, and then the stability of it. So I changed that, and the whole world has dynamic shadows now, which I think actually greatly adds to the ambiance. Beyond that, I've upscaled the textures for the entire world. The only area I don't have is the DLC currently, so everything has basically gotten a 2x upscale. Now at 1080p, are you 100% going to be able to notice that right off the bat, or right off the rip? Probably not, but it is a little bit sharper. You can now get closer to the textures and actually not see a blurry mess, so it's just quite a bit sharper. Beyond that, I have also disabled the in-game anti-aliasing, because it was awful. At first, I found a better version of the anti-aliasing that went unused, and that was an improvement. But it also was not great. It was FXAA, as that's what FromSoft used back then, and Dark Souls 3 suffers from the same thing. It looks terrible. Okay, I'm gonna kill this guy. Oh my god, 2 hits, you'll love to see it. And so yeah, I turned off the in-game anti-aliasing, and I created a little reshade preset, which you should be able to see here. That actually, it's called Vort Motion, which, of course, I am not the one who created Vort Motion, but it is a reshade shader that has the ability to use temporal anti-aliasing, which of course is what Sekiro, Elden Ring, Armored Core 6, that's what the industry basically moved to, and it's just a better, more stable anti-aliasing solution. So now you get a much cleaner image, even still at the same 1080p. In Bloodborne. So now we have better anti-aliasing, better textures, dynamic shadows, but we're not done yet. Because yeah, God, look at these dynamic shadows up. They go all the way up on the building up here. Beyond that, I have adjusted the visual config files, which are called the G params. And so I adjusted the fog, the density, the contrast, basically everything. I've gone through most lines of the G param and just made edits to the exposure. I enabled auto exposure and messed with the minimum and maximum luminance. And so that was quite a bit of work. I still have more tweaking to do because I'm not fully happy with it. And as part of the config file, editing that, which shout out to Trivia being a massive help, because she had a lot more experience with the GParam files than I do, and still does, because that's what Dark Souls 3 uses, that's what Sekiro uses, that's what Elden Ring uses, so going forward, they used it for everything. Basically disabling the ambient occlusion from the sun, but keeping the ambient occlusion and boosting it from all other sources, like regular ambient occlusion, the screen space. From the sun, it was kind of messy. And so that is thanks to Trivia, who's the one who told me that, like, hey, by the way, I disabled it from the sun, and I found it looked better. And I went, that is great. So I also did that, and I also have a modified material file, which is called an MTD file, and that's basically what controls surfaces looking, like different surfaces, like how they handle water, how they handle stone, how they handle wood, how they... now that flickering, I believe, is a regression in the emulator. That cropped up about a week ago, and that has unfortunately stayed around until now. But yeah, so that's not ideal. And yeah, so I did that. I also, some of the more manual work is if we go back here where the lamp is one of my more favorite changes. So this lamp here normally is just illuminated in the lamp itself. Of course, like as a lamp works, but it had no illumination hitting the environment around it. It was just kind of sitting there. It looked weird. So I added a tiny little point light that now the light actually hits the building nearby. And I think it looks a little bit more realistic. And then if we head this way, you'll notice that there's obviously the light shafts were already there, and they're gorgeous and wonderful. But the actual street lamps, you'll notice some of them are lit, some of them are not. But what I noticed is that the ones that were lit didn't have any illumination coming off of them. They were just lit, but it didn't hit the environment. It didn't affect anything. It just had the particle effect of like, oh, okay, they're lit. So I manually have added a point light to all of them that I have found thus far. I may have missed one. And so now you'll have the light from the lamps here actually hit the nearby environment. And I actually made some of them shadow casting. I need to go back, and I could probably turn on shadow casting for all of them. And the reason why that would work and not destroy performance is in this case, it's a little trick where basically only the player is going to get a shadow from it. You can actually toggle it to where the environment you have to actually tell to get a shadow from a point light. And so I just didn't do that because that would be too costly with too many point lights around, so I'm just not going to do that. And the other thing, probably the one actually no, let's not go that way. The thing I'm having a lot of fun with currently is adding parallax occlusion mapping, more so to the game. Now, you may have heard of that term. That is a visual technique that takes a flat surface and it can add depth to it and make it look three-dimensional, but not actually need them to render or model 3D. So the bricks on the floor here, we actually have parallax occlusion mapping active on them, and so you get a little bit of added depth to them, but they're not the greatest example of that effect because they already looked actually pretty good. They use a normal map and it's pretty solid. But the best example, this is one of them where now you can see there's a slight added depth to these bricks. Not a lot, because I didn't want to go overboard. Some bricks, I have to get a sense of how much depth should there be. because they're limited with a normal map. A normal map can only do so much depth, and their normal maps are fantastic, admittedly, but you're still limited on how much depth you can actually add. But yeah, here's another point light I added, and then so you can see that one's not lit. That one has a point light, and then in here it actually adds to the ambiance, I think, a lot, that there's this little point light on these as well. And oh yeah, so here's a great example. So right here you can see this little like cobblestone, and if I pan the camera, it's hard because the camera doesn't go all the way down, but if you pan the camera all the way down, that is actually a completely flat surface. Like, it's just totally flat with a normal map and whatnot. But with parallax occlusion mapping, when you tilt the camera based on the camera angle, you can see this wonderful depth that's being added to this cobblestone. And that's done through a height map. And you might be curious, did you add parallax occlusion mapping completely? Did it not have that function before? No, it's actually a function in the engine itself, and they used it on a handful of surfaces. And that was it. FromSoft doesn't like parallax occlusion mapping, from what I've seen. They don't use it in many of their games. Yeah, so here's an emulator thing that still happens where it doesn't load a map piece at a certain point. So if you quit out and come back in, then it works just fine. But yeah, they don't like parallax occlusion mapping. That's just not their jam. They used it, I think, twice in Dark Souls 3. I think they used it a few times. Like in Dark Souls 2, they used it on the, like a good example is like the Iron Keep walls. You'll see parallax, but it's not a great implementation of it. And Bloodborne, they used it a few times. And what I found, though, is I had to figure out how to enable it. And that had to do with what material setting it was using. Then you had to change the buffer layouts. And there was a lot of trial and error to get it to work. But so here's probably the best example of parallax yet, is this brick wall here. As you can see, there's a lot of depth between these bricks. But it might shock you that these bricks are actually a completely flat wall. It's hard to show on camera because it cuts off. But even at this extreme angle, you're still getting the depth. But this is actually a completely flat wall. And if we look close, you can actually see the crevices where there's like, it's blurred. That's because like the UV mapping of the texture doesn't really like parallax that much. But it's not terribly noticeable at whatever angle. So like, it's totally worth it. And then also it doesn't really work well on these bricks that they actually did geometrically, that are geometric, that they put on to like add extra depth because they weren't using parallax. But I think it's worth it to have that little visual kind of weirdness, to have these bricks stand out like this. Now what's interesting about this surface is it actually already had a height map. They already made one, which means they were going to use parallax occlusion mapping on it, but they didn't have it active. And I think I know why. Their default setup for the height map was way off in terms of, like, it was a good height map, but the contrast was too high, so the actual depth on it was extreme, and it didn't look good. And so I don't know if they just didn't go back and fix that, but I basically just, yeah, in Photoshop, easy peasy. Hell, you can do it in paint.net, you don't need Photoshop for that. And you can just fix the depth on it real quick by lowering the contrast, because the height map is literally just monochrome, right? It's black and white. And black is the lowest point, white is the highest point, and that's how they, basically how the shader understands it, and then they create the actual depth from it. So the other thing I did is I added a point light here. I actually added a point light on the like bonfires like this, because they didn't have enough illumination coming off of them. They did have illumination, but I didn't think it was sufficient. So I actually added a point light to where now you get this really awesome illumination that's hitting all the enemies as well, which they already were because the particle effect had a point light like baked into it, but basically I'm just assisting the point light on top of it and just making it a little bit brighter. And so these were more lights here that needed it. Now, I will show you turning off my extra things. So with this reshade preset, I have not updated my one on the mod yet, but basically if you don't like the depth of field, you can turn it off. The fake HDR, I tend to just like this because it adds depth to the scene and a little bit of color. But anyway, you can turn that off. And you can turn that off. And this is what it default is. The TAA, and then there's the AMD sharpening. And so this is what it looks like by default. Oh my god, that guy almost always gets me. God. And then I added a point light to the big bonfire there, just to add a little bit more illumination to the characters. Oh, looks like it didn't load the map piece over there. Oof. So we still have problems. If you can hear my cat meowing, he's going through it right now. He has the zoomies, he's outside the door, and he is absolutely loving it, and he has no idea what YouTube is. Unfortunately, because he is not respecting he is not respecting the video recording, but I'm sure you probably can't hear him. But yeah, I've added parallax to every possible surface that I can find in this game, and so I have to go one by one, and so I added it to these bricks here, because basically you can enable the height map. Like on these bricks, I have to do it on a per model basis, so there's so many of these are different models. Like this area over here is one model, another model. Oh my god. And you can basically, you get the height map in the normal map. In the blue channel is where you store it. And that's great, but you still have to actually go into the model, each individual model, and enable it for each individual surface that is using that said texture. So it's a bit laborious, but it's not too bad. I've gotten a pretty good sort of rhythm down for it. Oh god, it didn't load that part. Yeah, we still have emulator problems, but massive improvements to where it's not going to be a huge problem. Yeah, my cat has probably the most annoying meow of any cat ever. It's like if you've seen Dumb and Dumber, and he's talking about what is the most, do you want to hear the most annoying sound ever? It's basically that. It's kind of crazy. Okay, so this build of the emulator I actually downloaded right before this video. It's actually by Diego. Diego basically bundles in a bunch of different changes and refactors it commonly versus like getting the main build. So this way you can get slightly more features. But yeah, I added parallax occlusion mapping to this wall here, which doesn't look perfect with the paper that's hanging on it, but once again, I can kind of tweak that a little bit in the future. And we can kind of get that. But yeah, they fixed the depth on the trees. They used to be like see-through slightly. Ooh, yeah, I think I even have parallax on this wall here. So this was a completely flat surface that now actually has some depth. I'm not totally happy with it, to be honest. I need to fix, this is actually because it's like a big texture. It's a height map I'm not terribly happy with. I need to tweak it more because the bricks down there are a little bit too, like they've been microwaved. And so I don't like that, but I need to fix that. But I've done most of the bricks that are underneath here on this wall. And you can see they just have added depth. Now, of course, as I'm doing this, I commonly go, is anyone going to notice this? Probably not. And hence why I make a video about it. And I go, I have done it. And that's why normal maps are awesome, because I honestly think they get most of the job done and no one would notice. But now this lantern here, you'll notice, does not have the illumination around it. It's not hitting the environment. It's literally just a particle effect. So this is an example of one that I have not added a point light to yet, but even those little tiny things, I've added a point light to most of the other ones I've found throughout Central Yarnum. Oh god, we just had a vertex explosion. Oh, I didn't install those mods. I just reinstalled the game recently. Oops. So there's a vertex fix mod that basically turns off face customization. Oof. Forgot to install that, but yeah, you can really see all the dynamic shadows here. And so then I'm going to end this video, because really this was just showing off parallax occlusion mapping and the upgraded textures and all the, oh yeah, I also forgot to add a point light here. But I want to end this video with like a montage of different areas, as obviously I've just done Central Yharnam here. The mod does cover everything. I've done the most in Central Yharnam, and it's just going to be an ongoing process, but like you can get the upgraded textures for all the base game areas, the shadows, and some of the parallax occlusion mapping I've added to other maps as well. That's an ongoing process. Adding point lights, there's been new ones in many other maps, but that's also an ongoing process. And removing some point lights, like they do a lot of like blue fill point lights that are just there to show here's where a chest is. I've kept those, but I don't know. I think they look kind of weird, but that's just a personal thing. But yeah, God, the dynamic shadows are probably one of the coolest parts. Oh, I forgot. The other thing I did is I turned off the hero lighting for the player. So now your player no longer awkwardly is lit in the darkness. You can still see your character just fine, because it is using a different lighting layer. But now it isn't awkwardly glowing. Basically, your player always had a light that was just an imaginary light that was floating, that was sort of hitting your character from the side. So it always looked like it was lit like a hero, right? That's why they call it that. And I don't like that. I don't think it looks good. And so now that I've turned off the hero lighting and I've turned off the player mask, you might be wondering, what the hell is the player mask? Well, the player mask is basically when you had baked lighting, which we still have, when your character was in shadow, the player mask would just turn the character to be dark. It would transition over to that, because it's not a cast shadow. It's literally just a shadow that was pasted on or painted onto the surface. So there was no casting of shadows for your character to naturally get dark, so they had to do the player masking based upon where they were and where the light map had the shadows. So I turned that off, and because I have dynamic shadows, so now when you walk in shadow, the shadows naturally cascade over your character, and you actually get this really nice natural sort of, like you can see here as I'm walking through the dynamic shadows, you can see that they're actually going over my character. Instead, before, they generally wouldn't unless you were lit, but then sometimes you'd get dark, and then none of them, because it was basically on or off. It's either your character was in darkness or he was not. And it's not ideal for situations like this where there is a shadow, but it's also obviously just a tree shadow. So you're not completely lit or completely dark. You're in between because you're getting hit by the shadows. And so that is the best way of doing it, is just remove the player mask. And so you get this really nice, like you can see this, the shadow from the actual gate here goes over my character. Ugh, it's so nice. The shadows aren't exactly like massively high resolution, but I sadly don't have control over that, as I have not found any sort of toggle for shadow quality in any of the params or anything. They have one, but it doesn't do anything. It's seemingly already set to the highest quality. From what I have found, it's already on the highest quality. I've tried all the other settings, and they're worse. So this one I find to be good enough. I think they're not overly sharp, which actually helps them out, because they look more like soft shadows, and they look pretty natural. But you'll see, like, this line here is actually a baked shadow. So they're sort of living in harmony. I had removed all the baked lighting, which does make it look better in certain cases, but it also removes a lot of like baked, sort of indirect lighting, and there's a lot of like stuff that's put into the light maps that when you remove it, you're missing a lot. It looks flatter, but more contrasty. So I much prefer to have the baked lighting stay here. But yeah, so I'm going to end this video with a montage of different areas, and I'm going to walk around cinematically and edit that together. And then I'll probably use the main theme of Bloodborne. I wonder if that'll get it DMCA'd. They put that stuff up on YouTube officially and linked it to the composers and everything. So I'm wondering if Sony will not be happy with that, but we'll see. But anyway, thank you for watching the nerdy-ass part of this video. of just the technical improvements I'm making, and I'm going to extend to every part of the game for funsies, because I love this game and I love From Software. And Sony, I love you too, for sure, definitely. Please touch it. Please remaster it. Please do something with it. Please put it on PC. My mod would then be used on the PC version. I mean, I'd have to probably make sure that it works, and God knows what it would be. There'd be problems with that, I'm sure, but I would absolutely port this mod to the PC version if Sony decided to do that. Please, the 10th anniversary is coming up. For the love of God, do it for Miyazaki. He wants more people to play it, okay? Let him live his dream, and also my dream, which is ending it on that, and then we will cut to the montage.